Cruel manager insults elderly veteran at a hotel. Keanu Reeves. Reaction shocks everyone. Where are you watching this video from? Please comment and let us know. Also, don't forget to like the video and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. The Grand Regency Hotel was a marvel of opulence. The towering chandeliers sparkled like diamonds, and the polished marble floors gleamed under the golden glow of ornate light fixtures. Wealthy guests buzzed about in designer clothes, sipping expensive coffee and chatting in hushed, refined tones. Everything about the hotel screamed exclusivity and luxury. Amid this grandeur, a humble figure stepped through the gilded doors. Mr. Johnson, an elderly veteran with a slightly hunched posture, entered the lobby clutching a small, battered suitcase. His suit, though clean and carefully pressed, showed its age with fraying edges and faded fabric. The medals pinned to his chest, a subtle but poignant reminder of his service, seemed out of place in such a lavish environment. His worn shoes squeaked slightly against the marble as he approached the front desk. Though he didn't belong to this world of wealth and extravagance, Mr. Johnson's eyes sparkled with hope. His granddaughter was getting married, and he had saved for years to afford this moment, a chance to be close to her on her special day. Staying at the same hotel as the rest of the family, the wedding was set to take place in the hotel's grand ballroom, and he dreamed of being there without feeling like an outsider. At the desk stood Mr. Bradford, the hotel manager, a man of sharp suits and sharper words. Bradford prided himself on maintaining the hotel's exclusivity. As his trained eyes swept across the lobby, they landed on Mr. Johnson. Immediately, his lips curled in disdain. Bradford approached the elderly man, his polished leather shoes clicking against the floor. "Sir, can I help you?" he asked, his tone already laced with irritation, as he glanced at the veteran's scuffed suitcase. "Yes, thank you," Mr. Johnson said politely, his voice soft but firm. "I'd like to inquire about a room for the weekend. My granddaughter is getting married here, and I'd love to stay close to the family." Bradford raised an eyebrow, scanning Mr. Johnson's modest attire. "A room here?" he asked with a condescending smirk. His voice grew louder, enough for nearby guests to overhear. "Sir, I don't think you're quite aware of our rates. This ISN single quotes T. a roadside motel." A few guests glanced over, their expressions ranging from discomfort to amusement. Mr. Johnson, though visibly embarrassed, kept his composure. "I understand your rates," he said. "I've been saving for this for quite some time. It's an important occasion." Bradford snickered, shaking his head. "With all due respect, sir, our rooms start at over $1,000 a night. Maybe you'd be more comfortable looking elsewhere, something more affordable." The laughter and whispers from nearby guests didn't escape Mr. Johnson, but he stood his ground. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a small notebook. "I've served this country for over 30 years, he said quietly, opening the notebook to reveal his carefully planned budget. "I know it's a lot, but this is important to me. My granddaughter's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime moment. I'd like to stay here to be close to her." For a brief moment, there was silence. A few guests seemed to soften, but Mr. Bradford's smirk only grew. "Look, I appreciate your service," he said, his voice dripping with insincerity, "but this hotel is about exclusivity. You'd probably be happier staying somewhere less intimidating." Mr. Johnson's shoulders sagged slightly, but he didn't argue. "I understand," he said softly, closing his notebook and stepping back from the desk. His dignity remained intact, but his disappointment was palpable. The crowd of onlookers began to turn away, some shaking their heads at the scene, others resuming their conversations as if nothing had happened. Little did anyone know, someone else in the lobby had witnessed everything, and he was about to change the course of the day. Sitting in a quiet corner of the Grand Regency Hotel lobby was Keanu Reeves, sipping on a black coffee and flipping through a script he had been reviewing for his next project. His understated demeanor and casual black sweater allowed him to go mostly unnoticed amidst the extravagance of the hotel, a place he often stayed at during business trips. As he glanced up from his reading, the commotion at the front desk caught his attention. His sharp eyes settled on the interaction between the elderly veteran and the manager. Keanu watched as Mr. Johnson stood quietly, enduring the manager's cruel words and mocking tone. Keanu's brow furrowed. He saw the veteran's quiet dignity, the tremor in his hands as he tried to explain himself, and the dismissive smirk of the manager. The sight of the medals pinned to Mr. Johnson's chest hit a nerve. Keanu knew the sacrifices people like Mr. Johnson had made. He set his script aside and leaned forward, listening carefully to every word. When Mr. Johnson finally turned away, shoulders slumped in defeat, Keanu stood up. He knew he couldn't just sit idle by. Keanu approached the elderly veteran as he walked toward a quiet bench near the lobby's entrance. His steps were measured, his expression kind but determined. "Excuse me, sir," Keanu said, his voice warm and respectful. "Do you mind if I join you for a moment?" Mr. Johnson looked up, slightly startled by the tall man addressing him. "Of course, young man," he said, gesturing to the seat beside him. Keanu sat down and extended his hand. "My name's Keanu," he introduced himself simply, avoiding any mention of his fame. "I couldn't help but notice what happened at the front desk. That seemed unfair." Mr. Johnson hesitated but eventually nodded, his pride not allowing him to complain outright. "I just wanted to stay here for my granddaughter's wedding," he said softly. "I've saved for years, and I thought it would be worth it. But I suppose I don't belong in a place like this." Keanu listened intently, his gaze never wavering. "You served our country," he said, motioning toward the medals. "That's something not many can say. You deserve respect and kindness, not whatever that was back there." Mr. Johnson chuckled ruefully. "Times have changed, son. People don't care about that sort of thing anymore." "Well," Keanu said with a small smile, "maybe we can remind them why they should." Keanu stood up, placing a reassuring hand on Mr. Johnson's shoulder. "Give me a moment," he said before walking purposefully toward the front desk. The manager, Mr. Bradford, was already preoccupied with another guest, his tone equally haughty. When Keanu reached the desk, he waited patiently for Bradford to finish, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing inside him. "Excuse me," Keanu said once Bradford turned to him. "I'd like to talk to you about how you treated that gentleman earlier." Bradford glanced at Keanu, not recognizing him, and sighed impatiently. "Sir, we're quite busy. If you have a concern, you can take it up with." "I'm addressing it now," Keanu interrupted, his voice still polite but carrying an edge. "That man is a veteran. He's saved for years to be here for a family wedding, and you humiliated him in front of a lobby full of people." Bradford's eyes narrowed. "Sir, with all due respect, we have a certain image to uphold. We can't just let anyone stay here." Keanu raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. His tone remained calm but firm. "And what image is that? Because the one you've shown so far is pretty disappointing. If your hotel's success depends on belittling people who don't fit your standards, then maybe your standards are the problem." Bradford stiffened, clearly flustered. "I don't think you understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," Keanu said, his voice rising just enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. "You're more concerned with appearances than decency. But here's the thing, you don't know who's watching, and you don't know who you're talking to." Bradford's face flushed. "And who exactly are you?" Keanu leaned in slightly, his expression calm but piercing. "Keanu Reeves," he said simply, leaving Bradford visibly stunned. "Now, I'm asking you to make this right." The lobby grew eerily quiet as the name Keanu Reeves hung in the air. Guests stopped mid-conversation, some glancing toward Keanu with a mixture of recognition and surprise, while others whispered amongst themselves. The color drained from the manager's face as he realized the man he had been so dismissive toward was one of the hotel's most high-profile guests. "You're Keanu Reeves," Bradford stammered, his earlier arrogance replaced with palpable unease. Keanu nodded, his expression steady and serious. "I've stayed here often. I've always appreciated the staff's professionalism and the hospitality this place is known for," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "But today, what I witnessed was unacceptable. You didn't just disrespect a guest, you disrespected a veteran who has done more for this country than most of us ever will." Turning to the concierge nearby, Keanu added, "Please inform the senior management that I'd like to speak with them immediately." The concierge nodded hurriedly and rushed off, leaving Bradford standing awkwardly. Keanu turned back to him, his tone still calm but firm. "It's not too late to reflect on how you treat people, Mr. Bradford. A position of authority is a responsibility, not a privilege." As the commotion settled, Keanu returned to Mr. Johnson, who had watched the scene unfold with wide eyes. "Mr. Johnson," Keanu said warmly, "I'd like to make this right." Keanu led the veteran back to the front desk. where the same concierge who had fetched the senior staff stood ready. Please book the grand suite for Mr. Johnson and his family for the duration of their stay, Keanu instructed. All expenses covered, including meals and any wedding-related needs. Charge it to me. Mr. Johnson's hands trembled as he tried to protest. That's far too generous, Mr. Reeves. I can't possibly. Keanu interrupted gently. You've already paid more than enough, sir. This is the least I can do to thank you for your service. Turning to the growing crowd of onlookers, Keanu gave an impromptu speech, his voice resonating with sincerity. We live in a time where respect often gets overlooked, but it's people like Mr. Johnson, our elders, our veterans, who remind us of values like sacrifice, humility, and honor. We owe them our gratitude, not scorn. The guests broke into applause, some even wiping away tears at the heartfelt moment. Mr. Johnson, overwhelmed with emotion, gave Keanu a firm handshake, his voice cracking as he said, "You've done more for me today than I ever expected. Thank you." As the applause faded, the senior management team arrived, visibly concerned after hearing Keanu's request. The general manager, Ms. Carter, stepped forward, addressing Keanu with deference. Mr. Reeves, we're so sorry for whatever has happened. Please, tell us how we can make this right. Keanu didn't mince words. He recounted the incident, detailing how Mr. Bradford had humiliated Mr. Johnson publicly and failed to uphold the hotel's values. This isn't just about me or Mr. Johnson, Keanu said. This is about what kind of message you want to send to your guests and employees. Ms. Carter turned to Bradford, her expression stern. Mr. Bradford, is this true? Bradford hesitated, but could only nod reluctantly under the weight of the evidence. Ms. Carter's face hardened. Your behavior is unacceptable and completely against the standards of our establishment. Effective immediately, you are dismissed from your position. Bradford's face turned pale as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Without another word, he gathered his belongings and left the lobby in silence, his earlier bravado replaced by shame. Ms. Carter turned back to Keanu and Mr. Johnson on behalf of the hotel. I sincerely apologize, Mr. Johnson. We'll ensure your stay here is as comfortable as possible, and we'll also be covering all wedding expenses. The energy in the hotel transformed after the dramatic turn of events. Inspired by Keanu Reeves' compassion and humility, the hotel staff rallied together to make Mr. Johnson's stay truly extraordinary. The concierge personally escorted Mr. Johnson to the grand suite, where the room was adorned with thoughtful touches. A handwritten note thanking him for his service, a bouquet of flowers for his granddaughter, and a basket filled with complimentary treats. The chef offered to customize a menu for the wedding, and the event staff began coordinating the venue's ballroom for the celebration. Word of Keanu's intervention spread quickly among the hotel's guests. Many, touched by the veteran's story, approached Mr. Johnson to express their gratitude. A few even made generous contributions, offering to cover additional expenses for the wedding or providing small gifts. A young couple staying at the hotel volunteered to take professional photos at the ceremony, while another guest, a musician, offered to perform at the reception. One staff member, who had a grandfather in the military, quietly placed a pair of shiny black shoes outside Mr. Johnson's door with a note. Every hero deserves to shine. The once cold hotel lobby became a hub of warmth and kindness, all sparked by Keanu's selfless actions. The day of the wedding arrived, and the hotel's ballroom was unrecognizable, transformed into a stunning venue filled with flowers, twinkling lights, and elegant decorations. Mr. Johnson stood at the entrance, dressed in a new suit gifted by a boutique owner who had heard his story. Tears welled up in his eyes as he watched his granddaughter, radiant in her wedding gown, walk down the aisle. Just as the ceremony concluded and the guests gathered for the reception, the crowd parted, and Keanu Reeves entered, carrying a small gift box. The room erupted in applause and cheers as the bride and Mr. Johnson greeted him with wide smiles. Keanu raised his glass during the reception to give a toast. Today isn't about me, he began. It's about a man who embodies the values we should all strive for: courage, humility, and love for family. Mr. Johnson's life is a testament to the quiet heroism that often goes unnoticed but deserves to be celebrated. Turning to the bride, Keanu added, "Your grandfather's sacrifices made this day possible. I hope you carry his legacy of kindness and strength into your marriage." The room filled with applause once more as Keanu handed the gift box to Mr. Johnson. Inside was a beautifully engraved plaque that read, "To Mr. Johnson, a hero among us, thank you for your service and example of unwavering dignity." As the evening went on, Keanu danced with guests, shared stories, and ensured that everyone, especially Mr. Johnson, felt valued and celebrated. The story ends on a poignant note, with a narration highlighting the key themes. In a world where it's easy to look the other way, one act of kindness can ripple through an entire community. Keanu Reeves reminded us that true heroism isn't about fame or wealth, but about standing up for what's right and honoring those who have quietly sacrificed for the greater good. As the lights dimmed in the ballroom and the wedding party danced the night away, it was clear that Mr. Johnson's special day had become a memory, not just for his family but for everyone who witnessed the power of compassion and humility.